All right, folks, we're going to get started with the second half. So the first half, we heard from Natalie about some of the more business side of the upgrade and what it was like to get the content people all arranged and in mind. Now we're going to talk about it from a tech perspective. To lead us off, we've got Brent Pinkstaff who's going to talk about different methods of doing the upgrade. There's a couple different routes available to us, Sitecore 8. And then Chris is going to take, in particular, the case of how they did the CHA upgrade.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, I think like right there. So, hey guys. Set. All right, I'm Brent. If you don't know me, I am going to do us all a favor. I'm going to set a timer. Because anybody who's ever heard me talk knows that we're going to be sitting for a long time, and Chris won't get to talk. We'll set for 10 minutes because Chris's part's a lot more interesting about this.
Did you disable the snooze button?
It says 9:52. I think it's going to make a car sound or something. All right, so Chris is going to talk about the actual upgrade that they did in the tail end of this. It's going to be a lot more interesting, but that's only one way to do it. So what we wanted to do is start out with kind of the different ways that you can do the upgrades, and we'll talk about some of the gotchas, the way that some of the things go, and Chris will explain why they went the way that they did, because it wasn't the way that you guys were going to go in the first place. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't know when hearings come back. Okay, so upgrade paths. There's 3 different ways that you can do this. You can do it in place. You get an express migration tool, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in depth because it's a good tool. I don't know how many of you guys have used the predecessors to this. Sitecore's old. Have any used Sitecore's old migration tools besides Dean? No. Okay, so the thing that you don't know then is that Sitecore's old migration tools were terrible. They did not work right. I mean, they were better than nothing. This is a good tool, and I'll explain why. It's a very good tool. It's well thought out. It's easy to use. It's great. And there's nobody here besides Dean that knows the old ones were not. And you can also use it as a new instance. So an in-place upgrade. So depending on what version you're on, and when we get to the migration tool, a lot of people are going to be on a 6 series, they're going to be on a 6.6, hopefully, series. If you're going to use the migration tool, you've got to get there and up. And I don't know if everybody remembers, if you're prior to Sitecore's 6.5, Sitecore worked a lot differently, so you definitely got to get there. 6.6 is an easy hop before that. If you're dealing with some people here who are trying a 5 upgrade, that's not an upgrade, that's a rewrite. So no matter what you do, so we'll go for the step of the in-place upgrade. You're going to back up your databases. You're going to back all your files, and Sitecore has upgrade guides. No matter what version you're going to, and you can go really far back. They'll show you, and I'll talk a little bit. I think it's the next slide about some of the important changes that go on. But you can incrementally go and step through Sitecore. They have it for every single version. You can go through. And so the upgrade guides are good. You pick the target version you want. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the fact that you want to be on 8.2, not 8, not 8.1, but you want to be on 8.2, up to 8.3. This is the new one. Sorry about that. Upgrading the modules, that's going to be a separate piece. That's not going to be something that's part of the standard upgrade process in it. You're going to go through all that in your published site. And so there's this neat note in here that says, each version will ask you to rebuild the link database, rebuild the indexes, rebuild the publish the entire site. If you're doing a whole bunch of ones and you got to do them in steps, skip it. You don't need to do that. If you've got a real big database, you got lots of indexes, it's hours and hours and hours and hours and hours every single time. There's no point in that. You're actually just trying to step your way through to get to your end game. You're not trying to make the site work completely every single step of the way. And this is an important thing that I wanted to run through. So if not every version of Sitecore changes the databases, but one of the things you could do, especially if you start with, you're on, I don't know, 6.4 and you want to go to 7.2. You don't, in a lot of cases, have to do 7, well, you don't have to go 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, 6.6, 6.7. You don't have to do that. You can take Sitecore, you can take the binaries, you can, the end result is that you can stand up Sitecore, you can stand up your code, make sure you're on the right .NET version and whatnot, try to get it stand up. The one thing you can't do is just skip to that version and hope your databases work, because while the binary is going to get you everything you have, the version of the database, even if there's one script, it doesn't cover all of the changes that would have been there. You've got to go through you've got to go through all the steps. From Sitecore 6, my daughter wants to know she can eat the Doritos. From Sitecore 6, and this list I didn't specify here. This list is from Sitecore 6.0. These are the stop points that you've got to handle if you want to upgrade your databases. And they're mostly standard. You don't have, like, all of the individual steps, you don't have to worry about it. It's not like 6.3 update 1, update 2. You can go through the individual ones, 6.3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 6.x is going to be the first one. We'll talk about this. It's the first version that uses MVC. It's the first modern Sitecore out of them, and that's the point where you start using the migration tool. You'll notice that 7.2 is on here twice. That's because the very last version of the pre-experienced platform Sitecore is its own monster. So there's an update in 7.2, and then in update 6, there's an additional update. So if you were to actually start marching through this, you do need to go to 7.2 update 6 if you were marching all through it. You can't skip that one. Otherwise, all of the various updates, it doesn't matter. You can skip those. You go to initial version, initial version, initial version. That last version of 7.2 is its own thing. And you can see that the updates are different. If you don't run the analytics, you're not using DMS back in the day and whatnot, then you don't have to do the one. You can skip all the ones that say analytics. You only care about changes to core master and web databases. But like I said, what this allows you to do, if you were to do that in place and say, I want to go to this version, you would have to step through all of those. Even if the end goal is just to get it, if you're on 6.0 and you want to use the migration tool and you got to get to 6.6, you're going to have to hit those 4 steps there, even if you're just bringing it up on a vanilla database to do it. Okay, so we talked about the migration tool. And I can't remember, I may talk out of turn, I don't remember which way the slides are, but the migration tool itself is designed, so it says you'll need to run the migration tool for every instance in the environment. Say install. Okay, so you can actually do this, I don't know if this is on one of our slides, but you can use the migration tool in 3 different ways. You can say the version that I have and the version that I'm going to are on the same machine, and so is the tool. You can do it where the tool lives on with one of them, but your new instance is on another server. You just got to make sure that the permissions are there so it can write. You can have it so they're on 3 different things. You can have, I've got my original one, I've got the new one that we're going to, and I don't want this thing running on either one of them. I got it. So it isn't that there's a standard requirement, and they go through the instructions are really nice on it. It's going to explain all of the gotchas to it. Pretty straightforward to use. But so you do have to install target version. The target version, and I'm talking about the Express Migration Tool, the 2.0, not the one from last year, so the newer one. The target version is always 8.2 update 1. You can install any Sitecore version as long as it's 8.2 update 1. You can't do any other version. The one that you can do it from is 6.6. Every single update all the way through the last 7.2. So if you're on 6.6 or 7.2, it doesn't matter what update you're on. You don't have to go to the next one. You don't have to go to an initial release. It'll handle any of those. When you fire up the tool, I took a screenshot when I was running it. You can see that the first bit there, you can select all of the available versions for there, and it actually has a selection for the next one, which is, well, we covered this update, or 8.2 update 1. So what it does, it migrates solution-specific items to the core master databases. It's not going to do your web database. We cover that. No matter which version, you got to publish it out. Okay, it's going to generate the configuration patch files. It's going to change. It's going to highlight the options and stuff like that. And you can copy the security settings, custom roles, and whatnot from the 2 instances. When you fire up the tool, it asks you what you want to move over. It's not an all or nothing. You can make it all. But in some cases, depending on how you want to do it, you may only want to move your data items. You may want to, in this case, we're going to do something different with security. Depending on how what you've got running in there, you may not want to move all of those. The tool is very easy. Gives you a really nice interface. It tells you which pieces you can select or unselect them, and you go through the process. Okay, what it doesn't do, it doesn't update your code base. It's not a magic tool. It's a pretty magic tool, but it's not complete. You're going to have to update your code base. You're going to have to upgrade your models. And no matter which path you take out of these, the modules are always separate. Often, either they were written by and blessed by Sitecore, sometimes they're not. It doesn't really matter. You've got to take that into consideration. That's not something that is going to be handled for you at all. And the analytics data is its own monster, especially if you're going from DMS. Going from DMS to experience, the XDB stuff like that, that's your own headache right there. Oracle's not supported. And this is an interesting piece here. It will only work on a 64-bit machine. If for some reason you're on a machine with 32-bit, it's not going to work. It will install, by the way. It just won't work. It will install. I know this one because I decided to use it on a 32-bit machine. And we covered it's Sitecore 6.6 to 7.2. I'm seeing now, like I've already made my time. So now I'm going to talk quicker. What?
Have you seen the Express work for a real client for any sort of complex site?
I couldn't hear you, sorry.
Have you seen the Express version work in production, like for a real site?
For a production site. So what I did is, for a very complicated site, I am not running on a very complicated site. This was not used for, first talk about it, I'm going to spoil this speech here, but sometimes there's some gotchas. The piece that I put together, I made sure that I had enough templates, enough pieces. I did a couple other things that I thought were out of the ordinary just to make sure I fleshed it out. It was not a vanilla site when I tried out the tool, and it did work very well. I don't think there is a list of the current version. It's in the instruction sheet of some of the known errors. There really aren't that many in the new one. The old one had a lot of problems. And even older versions of migration, some of the Sitecore migration tools have problems like the messing up standard values and things like that. This seems to handle it very well. Standard values has always seemed to be a problem with the migration tools. Actually, there's a problem with the last one, but still.
One thing to keep in mind about running the Express migration tool is if you try it on, I would say, a moderately complex Sitecore site, is that when it goes through and scans your configuration files, it's going to turn off anything that's custom. And it's going to go through and it's going to basically patch it and tell you what it's removed. But what you'll need to do is after the update, you'll be running in the new 8.2, you'll have your content there, but everything that you've modified with these configuration files, you're going to have to reevaluate. This back on, turn that back on, so item by item, and validate that they are still doing what they need to do. And in many cases, you'll find that some of those custom configuration changes that you have made were actually to work around errors that now Sitecore knows out of the box, so you won't need them. But I guess the more custom your site was, and the more modules, and the more additional things you plugged in, you're going to have to go sort of item by item. I wouldn't recommend just turning it all back on and seeing what happens. You'll get so many configuration errors.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think it's not on this slide, but I'll talk about the configuration files a little bit when we're doing upgrades. Okay, here we go. Okay, so no matter what you do, you got to update the code base. And you were asking about a really complicated site. The more complicated the site is, the more complicated your code is, the less likely that this is a tool that you're going to be able to use. And I mean, the important thing about doing upgrades in general and trying to get a good cadence on it is that it allows you to actually upgrade your site instead of a rewrite. If you spend too much time maintaining a site and not upgrading the platform beneath it, you're going to run into a rewrite. Maybe the people back room that we're talking about, because you get stuck on a version because you have too much custom code and you never upgraded it. Eventually you can't upgrade it. Updating the .NET version, if you're going for an earlier version, you're going to 8.2, guess what? You're upgrading to the .NET version. I mean, you're going to get around that. You're going to have to do that. That's going to be the case actually in a lot of cases. You got to update references. So configuration overrides, which is covers what Dean's talking about, and I can't remember, I had a thing that I wanted to talk about here. That's to do with upgrades. So if you're going to A2, for instance, even if you're going from 8, and we had a site that was done, it was live, it was on 8, we need to go to A2. If you compare a vanilla 8.2 site to what you went to, what your end goal is. I've gone through the process, I'm on 8.2, and you compare it to a vanilla 8.2 site, we all know Sitecore has a lot of configuration files. Those configuration files are not going to look like an 8.2 configuration. And normally that doesn't really matter. When you're, in the end, the config files, they all roll up, it's all fine, it's all dandy. One of the things we ran into is that if you would install a module that's designed for 8.2, and it's going to overwrite a file, if you didn't start with 8.2, if it's an upgrade, your config file may not be where the module is expecting it to be. So take that into consideration. You could go through the process if you want to. No tool's going to do this for you. To say, I want to look and see where 8.2 puts all of its config files and how it structures it, and I'm going to go move them all. There is a benefit of doing that, but we all know how many config files Sitecore has. That's the one gotcha that you're going to get for any of this. It's not going to keep your site from running, but you do have to pay attention to things that you add later on, because if they're expecting things to be in a certain place, they're not there, you're going to run into a problem. And we did. This is a lesson learned. Let's see, well done. And this is, I'm done. All right. See, I only went like 7 minutes over. And that's good for me.
If you have any questions about Brent's presentation, save it to the end. We'll both be up here answering questions. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the CHA upgrade from the technical perspective, talk about the method that we chose to upgrade, and then how we went about executing it. So brief overview of the CHA site. As Natalie mentioned, the site was initially built on Sitecore 6.6. Some of the integrations, Microsoft Dynamics, intelligent community, specifically using the REST API, Google Search Appliance for search and indexing, single sign-on for user information, user roles, and Brent video for video content. The significant Sitecore modules that helped contribute to the way that we wanted to upgrade, the Sitecore Email Campaign Manager, ECM back before KB EXM, and the Breakcode Connector. So some of the constraints and the solution that we ended up doing for the CHA upgrade, first of all, the target version was 8.2. So when we're doing a lot of research, making sure that when we're doing upgrades and we're looking at EXM modules, we want to make sure that we're hitting that version, so doing the research against that version. The timeline was a constraint, about a month and a half, maybe 2 months. We were able to consolidate this, and I'll talk about it in more detail, but by minimizing the amount of environments that we needed to upgrade to get to a live upgraded version, specifically development and production. Backup files and databases each step of the way. This is part of the solution. You want to make sure that you're taking snapshots of your upgrade so that just in case something happens in the next upgrade, that you can go back to a previous version and re-perform those upgrade steps, making sure that you're not losing track of your changes. Before I mentioned upgrading the only necessary environments, development and production, well, what about a test and stage environment? Right? Surely you want to have those updated as well, so that when you have new features, enhancements, you can go back and make changes there, stages before going to production. The way that we did the upgrade, we essentially just cloned the production servers. So we had a complete clone of the production environment just on different IPs, different domains. So it wasn't live. So anything we pushed there safely, knowing that no one user was going to see it. Content freeze, we had, as I mentioned, about a week or two that got extended for content freeze. We performed the upgrade with the updated code and configurations. And then for go live, we did the DNS switch to the completely new production environment with key testers and stakeholders involved during the go live, so they can test and ensure the flow is good. After that, we had go live. We were comfortable with it. We then went ahead and retroactively upgraded any other environment that would support the project, such as QA, UAT/data, any other local development environment.
For all those other environments, you went through all the manual steps and just sort of like a copy over?
Great question. Yeah, so we definitely sped up the process. The code base was already updated, so we didn't need to do any additional work there. And yes, we took backups of production databases and files as well to the other environments to make that a lot faster.
So SQL upgrade as well, or what?
SQL upgrade in terms of
From 6.6, which version of SQL you guys were using?
I believe we're using the same version of this. I think it was 2008, 2012. Some notable changes. As Natalie mentioned, we ran some issues with Email Experience Manager. This was probably the biggest change on the project. It actually caused a lot of code change and configuration change. One of the reasons for that is before when it was ECM, the way that it handled users and subscriptions to emails was a lot different. It was user-based, Sitecore user-based. So if a user had a role they belonged to, you configure your email to say, for this particular role, you'll get this email. Well, that was completely changed in EXM. EXM started to leverage Sitecore's contact lists for emails. So we needed to make, because we had some customizations specifically around how to, or sending the emails, that we needed to make code changes because the API changed so much. In addition, we also had to use EXM's contact migration tool so that we could essentially migrate those contacts to the new version of EXM, not losing the data. And then, as I mentioned before, configuration changes, those pipeline changes, were really those changes, and where to patch, and any other settings that we needed to change. The other notable change was media framework. We had some configuration changes, no code changes, which was nice. There were some content changes and player markup changes. The content changes really were the new account item for Brightcove, where you can then run the normal Brightcove module sync to get all your videos in. But then the obvious problem is you now have all this content on your site that's pointing to all the old videos, right? So we needed a way to migrate those. Well, luckily, Brightcove had a migration tool that we're able to use that would essentially convert all the player markup into the new version. Fortunately, we didn't have any specific video items linked in Sitecore that we needed to migrate over. The use of Brightcove for CHA was all through the player markup, and so we were able to leverage the tool and not have to do anything else.
This is for Brightcove videos that are using the media framework.
That's correct, yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it's the media framework.
Content managers have embedded Brightcove videos all through the site.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Because embeds the Brightcove videos all through the site manually.
So if they're embedded into the rich text, essentially that was what the migration tool did. It converted all that into the new markup. Gotchas and lessons learned from this upgrade experience. The email experience manager, email delivery service. This is what Natalie was mentioning before that caused the schedule delay. Essentially, the list unsubscribe header was too long for some email gateway services, specifically for CHA's email gateway service. And so we had to get Sitecore involved, we got Spark Post involved, and CHA's IT involved. And we all sat on a call and we troubleshoot. It took several days, and eventually we got down to the root cause of the issue, which was the list unsubscribe. So there was no Sitecore patch necessary to fix that issue. That was simply Spark Post updating some of their logic on their end. And so luckily it was a nice easy fix. And we were able to then order GSM sending us. And as I mentioned before, that is what caused the issue. Hard drive space, something you definitely want to consider, especially if you're going from versions earlier than 7. You're going to have a lot of steps if you're doing the in-place upgrade. you want to make sure you have plenty of hard drive space for those backups. It's easy to run out of space because of all the database and file backups, especially if you have a lot of analytics information in your databases. So some of the bullet points I have here, we ran out of space while upgrading the development environment and converted migrating analytics data, and then consider adding more space temporarily to support more members. Analytics, convert users to contacts. I sort of talked a little bit about this with the ECM, DXM. We had a lot of log errors related to using this, and we weren't sure if it was completing or not. It almost looked like it was hanging. So we reached out to Sitecore, and they provided some support. Essentially what that was clearing the Mongo, tracking a lot of task queues that ultimately fixed the issue. So just some weird issues that we ran into. Again, this is kind of plays into that, make sure you have time to, and buffer that time so you have plenty of time to deal with these issues. And then XDB Mongo. So we went with a hosted Mongo through the same hosting provider that CHA uses, but we weren't responsible for setting up the server or anything. They handled all that. However, what that meant was when we started testing the application, the upgraded Sitecore instance, we ran into security complications. Sitecore kind of expects almost Mongo to be in like God mode and be able to create databases, and when it tried to create those databases, it didn't have the permissions to do so. So we worked quite a bit with the hosting provider to resolve some of those security complications, and once we did that, everything was working. So some tips for success from the technical side. Use configuration patching when you're implementing your solution before the upgrade. If you haven't, probably convert all your configuration to use configuration patching. What this will do is make sure that when you're doing your Sitecore upgrades, you have all these new configuration files. You don't want to be diffing these configurations with the new configuration files, your old with the new, and having to figure out where your new configuration lives. Using patching, it'll make it a lot more smoother process to do the upgrade. Ensure Sitecore files are up to version. What this really means is after you do each upgrade, check your binaries, make sure that they're the correct version. If they're not, you can definitely run into some unexpected errors, 500 error, things like that, and you'll be scratching your head. So if you run into issues, check, make sure the files are up to version. Unblock files downloaded from the internet. I know it's weird today that we have to do this on Windows, but essentially files that you download from the internet are blocked by default. Zip files, things like that. So just make sure that you unblock them so that everything works as expected when you run the executable or unzip the file, so on and so forth.
I'll make a point on that, because a lot of people don't know this. Most of the modules that you'll get off the Sitecore Marketplace or even download from the Sitecore website itself, because they're zip files or because they're packaged like update files. Unless you go into Windows and look at file properties and specifically unblock them, they may or may not work when you try to install them into Sitecore. And you won't know really that there's a problem until things don't work. Like you won't get good error messages when they happen. So just be mindful that any file that you download either off the Marketplace or from Sitecore itself, you go through that extra step. Because otherwise, it might install the content just fine, but any additional scripts that might need to run will not execute, and you will not get an error message when those don't execute.
Thank you. The next point, leverage the upgrade logs to troubleshoot issues you might have. So Sitecore has very detailed logs when you use the updated installation wizard to install your upgrade. And so if something goes wrong and something's not working as expected, go check those logs and see what happened. Maybe a file didn't get installed. Maybe there was some permissions issue or something like that. Just a great reference for logging of the upgrade. Investigate log errors and warnings. So separate to the upgrade logs, after you do each upgrade, it's a good idea to check the logs after you've spun up the site and navigated to a couple of things in your site. Browse the Sitecore admin panel, maybe look at some reports. you really want to see, what is my instance doing? Did I really finish this upgrade? Or are there outstanding issues that we need to address before we move on to the next step? The last thing you want to do is do an upgrade, have issues, keep it moving, and then later on find out that you missed a step that was critical to the upgrade. Next major point is take the time. Make sure you plan for schedule delays. These things, unexpected issues are probably going to come up. And the more complex your site is, the more modules, the more customizations you have, you just want to make sure that you have enough buffer to deal with those sorts of issues. Add in time for troubleshooting issues. This is similar to what I was just saying, but make sure that you have not just hours, right, but schedule. So before we're talking about schedule, this is hours, right? Add hours to your project to make sure that you have enough time to deal with these issues. And then last, but definitely not the least, ask Sitecore. That's what they're there for. That's what you have support with them for. Reach out to them. Find out how you should be doing the upgrade. Find out how you should be upgrading modules. They were a big help during this upgrade, and I imagine they would be to you as well. Any questions?
How'd you handle scope creep? I saw the CHA people saying, one of the reasons for the upgrade was that there are enhanced capabilities in Sitecore. So how did you help them understand the fact that, well, these capabilities might, be available and not get those expectations intertwined with the actual
We definitely came to a
upgrade?
clear understanding when we started the project. Both parties knew what we were expecting out of this, and that was an upgraded instance and nothing more. And so as long as we were in agreement, we were focused, and we stay on that path.
Did you experience any pushback from management on the CHA side saying, listen, while we're doing this upgrade, and if we're touching this code anyway, can we implement some of these new capabilities with the upgrade?
No, that wasn't an issue. Natalie's team is superb, and they know what they wanted out of the upgrade, and we got it.
So this was a single server environment, right? Not with the delivery and that stuff.
It was. The production was a content management server and 2 content delivery
So
servers.
what did you do differently in content delivery?
Say that again?
What did you do differently in content delivery? Like usually Sitecore instructions are for the single server and kind of go back to how to set up content delivery and run through those instructions.
Sure. So, yeah, we definitely had a process of upgrading the CM separate from the CD, and then looking at the documentation and applying the different patches and configuration options that were for both instances. But the nice thing is, once we had one CD set up, we could take that and just use it for the other.
I'll raise a point because you sit next to me and I heard some of these issues.
I think that's it for tonight, so we're
So one thing I want to point out, because this is something that when we've done other upgrades has caused us issues, and we mentioned it several times, but I can't emphasize it enough. Like there's upgrading the core Sitecore, which is great and pretty smooth, and that's a pretty well, but everybody has to go through that, right? So there's a lot of troubleshooting. When it comes to modules, though, that's a much smaller community, and there's issues that haven't been fully vetted, fully sussed out for some of these modules. The more popular the module is, the more likely it is that somebody's encountered a problem while upgrading it. You can get some troubleshooting. The more rare it is, the harder it is to find information on. One of the interesting things that we ran into that I remember was you guys had mapped out this great upgrade path. Like, here's how we do the database update, and here's how we do the code versions, and we can even skip some steps in here because we can do some shortcuts. And then we took a look at EXM, and we realized that, oh my gosh, EXMs, which are the essential versions you have to hit, do not align with the essential versions of everything. And if you actually put those things side by side, you realize, oh my gosh, we really do have to hit every single step when we think about the module and the Sitecore.
That's a great point, Dean. And actually, one of the things we were doing was we asked Sitecore, how do we upgrade our modules? How do we upgrade Breakpoint? How do we upgrade EXM? And sort of while we were waiting for the responses, we used the Express migration tool. And that's exactly what we found. We couldn't use the tool because we needed to upgrade the modules step by step with Sitecore. Specifically, the EXM was the biggest headache.
Yeah, one of the things, one of the things, I can't remember, was it 8.1 or 8.2 where they changed the media framework, and it's like the Brent, which we were using for CHA, we were using for Mary Kay, it's no longer supported. It's now its own, use at your own risk, open source. Gee, everybody, contribute to it and keep it working. So that's something that you have to take into consideration.
Absolutely.
A couple things that I realized that we didn't cover, so that came to mind was Chris talking. A couple things. Arun had a question about SQL Server versions. And that's something that I hadn't really thought to talk about, which is if you're running a very old version of Sitecore, you could be running like SQL Server 2005. You can't pass, I think it's 6.5 or 6. You've got to run 2008 or newer. So if you're running an old version, that's something to take into consideration. Now, for the most part, you can go backwards. I know that, like, what is the new, 2014 or so? I know you can run 6.6 on that. That's not a problem. I don't think there's probably a backwards compatibility issue. I mean, I'm saying that. I've never actually tried it. I've never tried to run 5.3.1 on 2014.
I have, it works.
Yeah. Did we do that?
So going back is not an issue, but if you are running an older infrastructure.
Yeah, you may be on 2005.
Yeah, so think about SQL Server, think about your Windows versions, think about that too. And particularly, again, if you're using other modules or even third-party like non-Sitecore or non-Sitecore Marketplace modules, you're going to have to work through, was this designed for 32-bit or was it designed for 64-bit? So think about the infrastructure as well as just the Sitecore, because you might have to throw more RAM on the machine. Newer versions of Sitecore, particularly the 8 series, do need more memory than the older versions do. So even if you're thinking about an in-place upgrade, recognize that the hardware stats and specs may have to be upgraded.
So Dean, you said it's 5.3 eventually.
You can.
So we have time to do that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you should.
you can. You will have to pay close attention to the SQL compatibility level for those databases. And make sure that the correlations haven't changed, because the defaults are different in newer versions of SQL Server.
Yeah, they definitely are. The interesting thing, when we went from 8 to 8.2, Sitecore's recommendation, and they worked with us on upgrading the databases because we had a couple issues with it, is their path, and it was kind of covered in that slide I had on databases, is what they want to do is, okay, I'm going to take 8, scrap your code, stand vanilla 8, whatever version we were on, 8, update 3, probably, 8, update 3, stand one up, stand your databases up. Go through the upgrade procedure databases only to 8.1. They wanted us to not skip to 8.2, do it to 8.1, stand up a vanilla 8.1, make sure your databases come up, then go to 8.2. Don't worry about your code. That's that database upgrade. Sitecore, we worked with some of the developers at Sitecore on a couple issues we had, and that was what their recommendation was. Stand up a vanilla one, make sure, go through that database upgrade, make sure it works. Great. Now take that one and do the next upgrade to the next version, do it like that. And that's what I'm saying, you can kind of hit those there. In the end, if you just want the data, in some cases that's really all you want, is your data to be able to pick and choose what you migrate, and I know that you do. You could have your data stood up a vanilla 8.2 even though you don't care about your code, because you just want your Sitecore and your data. So that was one thing that they did. One of the other things that I think that we didn't mention, this was an 8.2 one, and this will come close to your heart, Mr. Bailey, is that if you upgrade to 8.2 and you're on an earlier version, you have to go, if you're using Class Mapper, which you should be, you got to go to the latest version, or at least the latest version as of last fall, which deprecates a whole bunch of stuff. So if you might have done things that Neil may have done in the past,
Don't cast
casting
out
things,
everything.
yeah, that's deprecated, that'll break. And you have no choice but to go to that. So is it that hard to go back through? No, but if you've done a lot of stuff that is no longer supported in the older version or in the newer version of Glass Mapper, and you have 230 renderings, perhaps, you got to count for that in time. That's an extra. You got to go touch every single one of those renderings to make sure that they're compatible.
And there's a testing impact there.
Yes, there's a testing impact
But if
there.
you're touching
So that is, if you're using Glass, I hadn't thought about that. If you're using Glass, that is an additional thing. As you go to the newest version, you've got to go to a more modern version of Glass. The old one will not work.
Did you guys get any pushback when you were, I know you said that you had a problem where you were trying to figure out, whether it was Sitecore or your MTA. Did Did you guys get any pushback from Sitecore where, you know, they didn't want to deal with it, listen, our stuff's working, and then your MTA is like, no, we don't want to deal with it, you know? Did you have any problem getting everybody on a call?
Yeah, at the beginning, I think it's natural for people to want to think that, you know, it's not my code, it's
Right.
yours. And certainly there may have been a little bit of that, but I think once we started really digging in and everybody started seeing the issue, we all came together as a team to fix the issue.
And you didn't have any problem getting all of, you know, getting Sitecore and your MTA, I can't remember, what did you say, Sparkpost?
Sparkles, yeah. No, I mean, once we were able to, you know, obviously align calendars,
Sure.
everybody was able to come together and work together.
This was an interesting enough problem in a way that everybody was really motivated to get to the bottom of it once they kind of realized, no, this was a real interesting thing. Why Outlook and nobody else?
Sure. My concern there would be is that Sitecore is, you know, once they realize it's, you know, no, we can't replicate this on our end, they're going to say, this isn't ours, talk to your MTA.
I haven't had that experience, and I'm not saying that because we have Sitecore people here, because I'll say it either way. Or it was bad, but my experience, and this is going from Sitecore being a big black box when we weren't a partner, when I worked for somebody that wasn't a partner to that, is that they are very interested in solving problems. In the same way, like Dean's talking about, I mean, we're all geeks, we all do this because we like to solve the problem. That's much more interesting than building a site. Like, oh, why doesn't this work? So I do think that you're going to get a lot of help with that because, you know, you want to figure out what the problem is. That's what makes it interesting. Like what your syntax is irrelevant. It's mostly like problem solving. You know?
Keep in mind,
Because when I was going to say, Neil, that one of the reasons we switched MTAs was because the other one was starting to fail.
Gotcha.
So that we did take ownership of that, and we did make that switch actively because of that reason.
I wasn't so much worried about the MTA issue as I would be worried about, hey, listen, we're having a problem with, you know, insert upgrade issue here.
Right.
And Sitecore being like, listen, you know,
Yeah.
we can't replicate this on our end, talk to our modules.
Right. I
Yeah,
understand.
and I'm not saying that happened, I was just
Yeah.
wondering if anybody wanted to.
Yeah.
So an experience that I have had is that support desks everywhere are the same, right? They want to close the issue as
Sure.
rapidly as they can.
They want it all for their plate.
Right, and you know, hey, we all understand that.
Sure.
This is how every support desk works. I used to work the support desk. I understand how it is. So what I found is that if you do have one of those problems, and you can get hold of the actual Sitecore development team, you can escalate to the next
Sure.
level. Those are the guys who are like, what do you mean? What's going on here? Isn't that interesting? And a lot of times, that's where you can get traction. But just be aware that the Sitecore guys, you know, as soon as you say, oh, you got to work around, great, we're done. No, you can actually, oftentimes, especially if you know the developer who is working on it, like I've had some great success with other commerce guys.
Sure.
But I know when I work with the support team, I say, you know, and also go ping this developer because he knows about this issue. And once you get those folks in there, they're like their puzzle solvers are beyond.
Right. Yeah, I've never had a problem with their support team, I was just wondering if you guys,
Yeah.
and, you know, it's because you were dealing with multiple vendors.
Sure. Yeah. No, in this case, everybody keeps together.
No, I love the Sitecore support team.
That- and-
Please don't flag my support account.
Advice. I work with Print Experience Manager, which is one of those small modules with a small community, right?
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of help out there. It's always a good idea to contact your account rep.
Sure.
Can I get this escalated? 'Cause I think this works over here. Yes, they want to get paid from any tickets they close. And so ask it to be escalated, you know, and be persistent, and you'll get that.
Fair enough.
I could do well.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, but please don't flag my support.
If anybody has anything not nice to say about Sitecore, let's hear it. Because we need feedback, and that's one of the reasons that we're here is so that we can collect that. We are so dependent on this community to keep our product up to snuff, and if feedback, good or bad, is welcome. And no offense, whatever you take, and if anybody has a suggestion for how things might run better, so
The upgrade instructions are the CDs.
yeah, right. Yeah.
I guess they really don't, do they? They don't really sell the CD servers.
No, they always talk about single server.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought about saying, then you go to the, how do you install a new CD server and run those websites?
Works fine on my laptop.
Looks great in development, right?
We just did, I actually, 20 minutes before we left, finished an A2 upgrade on another instance today, and yet the CD servers are their own thing. That's completely different than, hey, do you have CM working? Yes, we do.